is Jimmy Scott's High and Tight, presented by his sponsor, To Be Named Later. And today we have on the other line a very special threesome. We have Douglas Gladstone, who's the author of A Bitter Cup of Coffee, How MLB and the Players Association Threw 874 Retirees a Curve. And we have two of those retirees also on the line. One is David Clyde, who was a first-round draft pick of the Texas Rangers way back in 1973. And Steve Grilli. Good. And I'm glad I have one fact right so far. And Steve Grilli, who was a non-drafted free agent with the Detroit Tigers, chosen in 1970, and spent 3 years with the Tigers, 4 total in the major league ranks, and both David and Steve do not have major league pensions, and that's what we're talking about today. So, guys, welcome to Jimmy Scott's High and Tight. I think I want to start real quick with Douglas Gladstone. Doug, you wrote the book, A Bitter Cup of Coffee, and if you could get into kind of briefly how you discovered this issue, and actually, before that, even describe what the issue is, what we're even talking about tonight.
We're talking about the fact, Jimmy, that to give you and your listeners some context, in 1947, the pension fund was established in Major League Baseball. You needed 5 years to vest to be eligible for an annuity. 22 years later, we fast forward to 1969, and that requirement was lowered to 4 years. And then in 1980, and I won't go through the protracted background of the strike that actually never occurred, but there was 92 exhibition games canceled in the exhibition season leading up to the 1980 season. The Players Union actually came back to play, but they then set another strike date of Memorial Day weekend, 1980. The hot-button issue at the time was free agency, go figure, and basically the league negotiator, Ray Grilli, who's still alive, he's 83 and living in Connecticut, he made Marvin Miller, who also is still alive. In fact, my book came out on his 93rd birthday on April 14th, made him this great proposal, instant pension eligibility. And essentially everyone since 1980, all they've had to play is one game for your medical benefits and 43 games of service credit, essentially a quarter of a season for your retirement annuity. The problem, of course, with that is, and that's a great thing, you know, if you're a union dues-paying member, wow, you qualify for an annuity essentially after tops a month. Problem with that is that they either forgot to retroactively amend the pension requirement for players like David and Steve, those fellows who played in the years 1947 and 1979, or, as my book suggests, they don't want to do what most people would think is the right thing to do by including all of these guys in the pension fund.
Now, that's, to me, only part of the issue, because, there are a lot of people who have regular jobs out there, and they need, say, 5 years in order to vest for their 401k, for example. But there's a precedent here that you guys should get into about why you feel you should get that pension, the pre-1980 players.
Just before David and Steve chime in, there are actually two precedents here. In 1997, I mentioned that the pension fund began in 1947. In 1997, in October of that year, the Commissioner's Office conferred quarterly $10,000 payments on all those ball players who played prior to 1947. They're called the pre-1947 players, and Commissioner Selig wanted to recognize their contributions. And then in January of 1997, Major League Baseball, at their executive council meeting in Arizona, perhaps it was to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, they very magnanimously gave pensions. And when we say pensions, we're actually talking about life annuities here. The money would die when the player passed. they conferred pensions upon all those veterans of the Negro Leagues. Here's where any employment labor law specialist would cry foul. Because, Jimmy, let's say you're the president of Company A, and, I don't work for Company A, but Steve and David do. And let's say you set 10 years as a vesting requirement. Well, Stephen and David don't meet it for whatever the reason. You give them their pink slips or they quit. But going in, they would know that they didn't meet the vesting requirement. Well, then I come along and you unilaterally give me a pension, their pension. Why are you giving me a pension when I have no employment contractual relationship with your company? That's essentially the issue here. We're not talking about whether or not it was right to give the Negro Leaguers annuities. I mean, let's face it, Major League Baseball during the 20s and 30s and 40s just mirrored the segregationist times that we're living in. And you know what? Props to MLB for trying to remedy those social ills. But from an employment labor perspective, no. Stephen and David deserve those pensions more than, say, me, because I never worked for your company.
And Stephen and David did.
Yep.
Now, yeah, and the thing that comes down to, I kind of, I think they did the right thing, and I think David or Doug pointed it out that Major League Baseball, you're looking for them to do the right thing, to step it up and do it. Well, maybe and looking at what they did for the Negro League, I think that was the right thing to do. I mean, the segregation line was drawn back in those days, and unfortunately, some of the greatest ball players that could have played Major League Baseball didn't, because of that segregation situation. And the fact that David and I were paying into the pension when we were players, I mean, there's money taken out. I was all part of the Marvin Miller era and having to sit in meetings. We got locked out of spring training. I mean, the movement that we were all part of, we feel that if this is the right thing to do for what you did for the Negro League, I think it's the right thing to do for us, too.
I don't know that we're entitled to it. I knew when I retired what I was short as far as a pension was, but as you mentioned a little bit, 47 players, the Negro Leagues, it's a little dissatisfying in a lot of ways. Not so much that those men have been rewarded and compensated for what they did for the game of baseball, but I guess the biggest disappointment on my end is we helped Steve and myself and 847, 874 others. This was an original group of over 1,200. We've lost roughly 400 guys over the years. But it's what we fought for. And I don't want to sound like sour grapes, because they've first off been blessed my entire life, blessed to have been able to play the game of baseball, to make a real good living the last 30 years. So on the one hand, I don't need the pension. I'm not going to lie, I would love to have it, but there's a lot of guys out there, Jimmy, that are dying for this, that need it. I'm not going to die. Like I said, I've made a good living, but there's guys who definitely need this, that put a whole lot more on the line than what these guys have going these days in a lot of ways, because I don't mean it to sound like we all walk 7 feet of snow going to school both ways uphill, like we were all told growing up, but back when we made $15,000, $18,000, $20,000 a year and put everything on hold to go on strike or to be locked out, these guys make more in a year's time, and I realize there's inflation and everything, but their salaries have more than exceeded inflation. They make more in a year's time than a lot of guys made in their entire careers. And so the money's out there. The money's out there to do this with. It's just a matter of getting the people. The other thing is today's player doesn't even, in a lot of ways, recognize what's going on. They are not aware that there were